"Step back from the window," Mrs. Okafor whispered, pulling my arm so hard my coffee nearly went over the rim. "Not yet. She doesn't know you can see her." That was how my son's engagement party began. 7:30 in the morning, pale spring light just starting to clear the backyard, and our housekeeper of 14 years was pressing herself flat against the kitchen wall, peering around the curtain edge like we were in some kind of film she hadn't agreed to be in. I might have laughed at the sight of her except for one thing. Josephine Okafor did not panic. She had been in this house through 2 broken pipes. Through the winter, I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Through the long, terrible months of my husband Roy's illness. She had cooked and cleaned and kept this household upright through things that would have undone a lesser person. And she had never once looked the way she looked right now. So I stepped back from the window and I listened. I pressed myself next to her against the wall and looked where she was looking, out through the gap in the curtain to the backyard. Raina was down there. She had let herself in early. We weren't expecting a soul until noon, and it was barely past 7:30, but she wasn't coming to the door the way a guest would. She was standing at the far edge of the yard, near the old oak Roy planted the year Aaron was born, with her back to the house. She had her phone pressed hard against her ear, and her free hand was moving as she talked. Sharp, chopping gestures, the kind you make when a conversation isn't going the way you intended. I watched her for close to 2 full minutes. She didn't pace. She stood in one place and talked and gestured, and once she turned her face sideways and I caught her expression in profile. Something hard and calculating underneath the usual grace, something that had no business being on a woman's face, the morning of her own celebration. Then she hung up. She stood still for a moment, staring at the oak tree Roy had planted. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her blouse, and she walked around to the front of the house as if she'd simply stepped outside for fresh air. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Okafor didn't move toward it. She turned to me and said, "Before you let her in, you need to hear what I found this morning. Thank you for being here with me today. I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you're listening from right now, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. If you know someone who needs this story, please share it with them. And one more thing, some details in this account have been adjusted to protect the people involved. But the heart of what happened, every word, every piece of paper, every moment in that room, is exactly as I'm going to tell it. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. My husband Roy died 2 years and 7 months before that morning. Pancreatic cancer, and it moved fast the way that particular disease does. Here in March, gone in August, no warning and no negotiation. He was 64 years old, and the most level-headed man I've ever known, and I spent the first year after he was gone, reaching for his voice in the back of my mind, the way you reach for a light switch in the dark. One of the things he used to say, and he said it often enough that it became almost a joke between us, except he always meant it, was this: "Your instincts are smarter than your manners. Don't let your manners win." Our son Aaron had taken Roy's death the way quiet people take devastating losses. He went inward. He worked longer hours, spoke less, ate without tasting. He was 33 years old and grieving his father, and running the small construction company Roy had helped him build, and I watched him from a careful distance and worried in the particular helpless way that mothers worry when their children are adults and beyond the reach of the things that used to work. Then, 14 months ago, he met Raina Sloan. She was at a contractor's dinner, there as a guest of someone Aaron barely knew. He called me the next morning, which he almost never does, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard in over a year. Lightness. Actual lightness. She was an event consultant, he said. She'd lost her mother when she was young. She understood grief in a way most people didn't. She was thoughtful and funny, and she had this way of really listening when you talked. I said all the right things. I was happy for him. I meant it. But the first time Aaron brought her to my house for Sunday dinner, I noticed her eyes. Not her smile. Her smile was practiced and warm and exactly what it needed to be. Her eyes. They moved around my dining room cataloging things. The framed photographs. The built-in shelves Roy had made by hand. The corner hutch where I keep the good china that was his mother's. She looked at all of it the way you look at things you're trying to remember the value of. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself I was grieving and paranoid, and probably, on some level, not ready to share Aaron with anyone. 6 months in, when I tried, carefully, gently, to say that there were things about her I didn't quite understand, Aaron went quiet in a way that reminded me of every argument we'd ever had when he was a teenager. "Mom," he said, "I know you miss Dad. I do too, but I need you to let me have this one." I let him have it. For 8 more months, I smiled at Raina Sloan over dinner tables and said nothing about the stone in my chest that never dissolved when she was in the room. Roy's voice would surface sometimes when I was trying to sleep. "Your instincts are smarter than your manners." I kept letting my manners win. Until the morning, Mrs. Okafor's hands were shaking in my kitchen. She had arrived at 6, the way she always does. For big occasions, she'd been preparing the guest bathroom with fresh towels and soap when she passed the hallway and found Raina's bag had slid off the bench near the guest room door. Raina had asked, weeks ago, cheerfully, helpfully, whether she could come early on the day of the party to assist with setup and change into her outfit here. We'd said yes without hesitating. She'd let herself in with the spare key Aaron had given her. Mrs. Okafor picked up the bag to set it back on the bench. The zipper was open. A folded piece of paper had slipped out partially. She could see it without searching, without prying. It was simply there. She almost put it back without looking. She told me that herself. She said she almost didn't look. But she did. It was a marriage certificate, issued in the state of Nevada, stamped and notarized and entirely official. The bride's name, Raina Sloan. The groom's name, Gil Ferris. The date, 3 years and 4 months ago. She photographed it on her phone before Raina finished her shower. She had it back, in the bag, closed, on the bench before Raina came downstairs, and asked how the centerpiece arrangements were coming along. I made her show me the photograph twice. Before I tell you what I did next, I need to know you're still with me. Comment the words "show me" right now if you're ready, because what I'm about to tell you is the part that stopped my heart completely, and I want to make sure you're here for it. I went to my car. Mrs. Okafor had done one more thing before I arrived that morning. While Raina was upstairs, she'd glanced at the return address on an envelope in the bag, a utility bill Nevada routing number, made out to a Gil Ferris on a street in Reno. She wrote the address on a slip of paper and pressed it into my hand when she told me everything. I sat in my own driveway in my car and found a phone number for Gil Ferris in Reno in under 10 minutes. A licensed plumber, small business website, listed number, professional headshot of a plain-faced man with tired eyes. I called it. He answered on the second ring. When I said I was calling about Raina Sloan, he went so quiet I thought the line had dropped. Then he said, "How did you find me?" We met 40 minutes later at a diner on Route 9, halfway between my house and where he'd been staying with his sister. He'd driven down from a town to the north. Been there 6 weeks, he said, since Raina had left their Reno apartment with the household cash and his mother's jewelry and no note. He hadn't reported her missing, because somewhere beneath the shock he had known. She hadn't been taken, she had decided. Gil Ferris was 41 years old and looked like a man who'd stopped sleeping properly. Around the same time his wife disappeared. He was broad through the shoulders, quiet, and he sat across from me in that vinyl booth and wrapped both hands around a coffee mug and told me everything without my having to ask for very much of it. They had married 3 years ago. He'd thought she was spontaneous, free-spirited. She had no steady income, but there always seemed to be money. Appearing from somewhere she kept vague. He had overlooked things he shouldn't have. The timelines in her stories that didn't hold up. The nights she said she was with friends. The way she changed the subject when people asked about her family or where she'd grown up. Then the debts surfaced. Not his, hers. Credit lines opened in both their names. A private loan from someone she refused to name, a figure she became frantic about when he pressed her. She cried and promised she'd handle it. 3 weeks later, she was gone. He pulled a copy of their marriage certificate from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table between us like a piece of evidence he'd been carrying for 2 months, waiting to find someone who needed to see it. She told me once, he said, that if she could access real money, her words, she always said real money, we could pay everything off and start over clean. She'd been researching people, businesses, properties, people with assets who might get close to. I looked at the certificate on the table. Then I looked at him. My son has land, I said. His father left it to him, and a company they built together. Gil Ferris closed his eyes. I am so sorry, he said, and it was not a performance. It was the apology of someone who feels responsible for the fire their own house started. I am so sorry. I drove back with a copy of their marriage certificate and 2 pages of bank statements he'd held on to. Accounts in both names, withdrawals he hadn't authorized, a pattern that told a complete story. I had 20 minutes before I absolutely needed to be inside my house, smiling at guests. I called Mrs. Okafor on the way and asked if Aaron was home. He'd just returned, she said. Raina was upstairs with him. Keep them occupied, I said. I need 15 minutes when I get there. I'll start on eggs, she said. He always eats before big days. I need to be honest about what I considered on that drive home. I thought about taking Aaron aside privately. I thought about sitting him down in his father's kitchen and showing him the documents quietly, just the 2 of us, and letting him process it away from any audience. But I remembered the phone call 8 months ago. I remembered his voice going flat and careful when I raised my doubts. He had not been cruel. My son has never been cruel. But he had been certain, and his certainty had come from wanting her to be real so badly that he would defend her against anything, even the truth. If I told him privately, she would have an answer ready. She had been building toward this day for over a year. She would not fall apart in a one-on-one conversation with his mother. She would pivot and cry and say the right things, and Aaron would be standing right there watching her do it, wanting to believe her. I needed him to see it, all of it, before she had any warning. I texted Gil Ferris the address of my house. The party began at noon and reached its natural rhythm by 1 o'clock. 40 people, maybe a few more. Roy's old colleagues, Aaron's crew from the company, cousins, neighbors, the pastor, who'd presided at Roy's memorial service. Raina had changed into a cornflower blue dress that suited her beautifully, and she moved through my living room with the ease of someone who had always lived here, touching people's arms when she spoke to them, laughing in the right places, doing everything right. I watched her from across the room and I thought about Roy. Look at people's eyes, he'd say, not their mouths. Her eyes never stopped moving. They cataloged the room continuously, Roy's photographs on the mantel, the shelves where I keep labeled folders of property documents, Aaron's face as he crossed toward her. She was taking inventory even now, even here, at her own celebration. Aaron tapped his champagne glass at 1:15. The room settled. He stood beside Raina with his arm around her waist, and the expression on his face was so unguarded, so luminous with hope, that my throat ached with everything I was about to take from him. He looked the way Roy had looked at our wedding. Open all the way through, no armor left, just the pure, foolish bravery of trusting someone completely. He started to speak, welcomed everyone, said how much it meant to have the people he loved in one room. I stood up from my chair. The room misread it at first. A few people smiled, assuming I was adding to the toast, the proud mother with something warm to say. I waited for the smiles to settle before I spoke. "I am sorry to everyone gathered here," I said, "and I am sorry to interrupt this moment. But I cannot stand here and watch my son announce his future with a woman who is already legally married to another man." The silence was immediate and absolute. Aaron's face didn't move at first. The hope stayed in place, like the muscles hadn't received the signal yet. Raina's face went white. "What are you doing?" she said. Her voice dropped low and controlled. "You're upset about something. I understand that. But this is not the moment." "Her legal name is Raina Sloan Ferris," I said. "She married a man named Gil Ferris in the state of Nevada 3 years ago. The marriage was never legally dissolved. I have the documentation." Aaron said, "Mom, just my name," in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a small boy and had been hurt badly and was trying to be older than he was. Raina pivoted. She turned toward the room, toward Aaron's friends, Roy's colleagues, the pastor, and her expression transformed into something wounded and bewildered. "She has never approved of us," she said. "All of you have seen it. This is what grief does to people. It makes them afraid of change, afraid of anyone new." The front door opened. Mrs. Okafor had let him in through the side entrance as I'd asked. Gil Ferris walked into my living room, and I watched 14 months of carefully constructed fiction collapse across Raina's face in the space of 2 seconds. He didn't perform anything. He was not dramatic about it. He stood at the edge of the room with his jacket on from the diner, and he looked at Raina steadily. Not with anger, with the terrible exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has finally been given permission to set it down. A woman near the back said softly, "Who is that?" "My name is Gil Ferris," he said. "Raina is my wife. We've been married for 3 years. He produced the document from his jacket. She left 2 months ago. The room came apart quietly, not loudly, not with shouting, but in the way a room comes apart when something load-bearing has given way. People turned to each other. Glasses went down. Someone near the window made a sound like they'd been lightly struck. Aaron released Raina's waist. He stepped back, 1 step, 2, until he was standing entirely apart from her, and the distance between them looked like a different kind of space than it had been 30 seconds ago. "Raina." His voice had gone flat in a way I had never heard from him. Not angry. Anger would have been easier to watch. Flat, the way a voice goes when something has just been understood all the way through and the understanding is unbearable. Is that true? Not a question. Her eyes filled and spilled, and I will go to my grave not knowing how much of those tears was genuine. "You don't understand what I was facing," she said, her voice breaking on the right syllables. "The debts, the people I owed money to. I couldn't stay in Nevada. I had no way out. I needed. You needed what my father left me." Aaron's voice was very quiet. She flinched. "You needed the land, the accounts." "Aaron, please." "Did you love me?" Still quiet, still flat. Any part of it, or was all of it, every conversation, every time you said, was it always just a calculation? She didn't answer. Her eyes moved, almost involuntarily, toward the shelf where I keep the deed folders. Aaron saw it. I watched him see it. Something left his face then that I don't have a word for. All the warmth, all the hope, all the luminous openness of the man who had been standing there 30 seconds ago, making his toast. It went out like a light at the flick of a switch, and what replaced it was something older and quieter and permanently different. He turned away from her. "Please leave my mother's house," he said. She tried once more to speak. He did not turn back around. 2 of Aaron's friends, men he'd known since his 20s, good and steady people, positioned themselves near the door without being asked. Roy's old colleague Walter guided guests quietly toward the dining room. Mrs. Okafor appeared from the kitchen and stood near me without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. Raina gathered her things from upstairs. She walked out through my front door in that cornflower blue dress with her bag over one arm and her chin level, and she got into her car, and she drove down my street, and she was gone. The guests left with the careful quiet of people who understand that there is no graceful version of what they just witnessed, and the kindest thing they can do is not make it larger. When the house was empty, Aaron sat down on the couch. Roy's couch, the wide one near the window, where Roy used to sit with the Sunday paper, where Aaron used to come and sit next to him when he was a boy and wanted to be near his father without saying so. He sat with his forearms on his knees and stared at the middle distance, and I sat down beside him. We didn't speak for a while. Outside, the oak tree Roy had planted caught the late afternoon light. "I missed everything," Aaron said finally. "I went over it in my head on the way here, and I missed all of it. The things that didn't add up. The way she'd changed the subject. I missed it because I needed." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I needed her to be real." "She was very good at this," I said. "She had practiced for months before she ever sat down next to you at that dinner. This wasn't something that happened to you because you were careless. It happened because she was deliberate. You didn't miss it." I thought carefully before I answered. "I felt something wrong. I didn't know what it was, and I tried to tell you once, early on, and you weren't ready to hear it." He was quiet then, I remember. "I'm not saying that, too." "I know, Mom." He put his hand over mine on the cushion between us. "I know why you're saying it." The light shifted. Somewhere outside a bird started up and stopped. "Dad would have had her figured out in 2 weeks," Aaron said. "Maybe," I said, "but your father was also a man who fell completely in love, and love makes everyone slow. Even him, I promise you." Aaron looked at me sideways, and for a moment he looked so much like Roy. The same jaw, the same way of tilting his head when something has actually reached him, that I had to look away at the window. "Thank you," he said, "for not staying quiet again." The legal proceedings moved without dramatic complication once Aaron's attorney became involved. Raina faced charges that included marriage fraud and financial deception. Gil's attorney handled the Nevada dissolution. By the time the first hearing was scheduled, Aaron had returned to the construction site, was eating dinner at my table 3 nights a week, and had found a therapist on his own, without my suggesting it. That last part I counted as the clearest sign of progress. Mrs. Okafor received, at Aaron's insistence and over her protests, a bonus that made her cry standing at my kitchen counter. Which made me cry, which made her laugh and tell me I was distracting her from a pot that needed watching. 4 months after the party, Aaron and I were sitting in my kitchen after dinner, and I asked him whether he thought he'd been foolish to love Raina the way he had. He considered it the way Roy used to consider things, fully, without rushing to the comfortable answer. "No," he said. "What I wanted was real. I wanted a partner and a future and someone to grow old with who wasn't going to leave. That's not foolish. I just gave that want to the wrong person." He looked up from the table. "I'll recognize her when she comes," he said. "The real one. I'll know the difference now." I put my hand on his shoulder and thought about Roy, and about the oak tree in the backyard, and about the morning Mrs. Okafor's hands were shaking, and I got in my car and drove to a diner and chose my son over my manners. They tell you that a mother's instinct is a gift. I believed that before any of this. But I had spent 8 months letting politeness override it, letting my fear of being that mother outweigh the quiet alarm that never stopped ringing. I won't do that again. If you have someone in your life right now who makes that alarm sound, if your gut has been telling you something that your manners keep talking you out of, please hear me. You are not paranoid. You are not jealous. You are not projecting your grief or your fear onto something innocent. You were given that voice for a reason. The hardest thing I ever did was stand up in a room full of people and say what I knew to be true. But one moment of painful honesty is always better than a lifetime of living inside a lie someone else built. Trust what you know. Protect the people you love. And never, not once, let your manners win.